What's up, Workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we're talking about BlizzCon 2019. This is my first BlizzCon. This is your second BlizzCon. And there's a lot of announcements and a lot of things that we need to break down.
So, quick overview of the announcements. D4 confirmed, no launch date. Overwatch 2 confirmed, no launch date. Hearthstone getting a new deck and everything as per usual with a new game mode that looks pretty cool. WoW, new expansion. As expected.
Yeah.
That's kind of the big ones. Warcraft 3 Reforged was back on the floor. That's your big overview.
Yeah, going into beta. So people are maybe assuming that it might go into beta throughout the rest of December and be a January launch, or it could be a late December launch as well. Obviously, we can't, not talk about the issues going into BlizzCon with BlizzCon, with this, Free Hong Kong and that movement. And Jab, J. Allen Bragg, got up on stage before showing anything, and he issued his version of an apology. I've been, seeing online. We were there in person, and then there's people who are saying it's not an apology, that it is an apology. Also, that we've stated and other people stated that it's possible to be excited for what Blizzard is doing, and at the same time frustrated at how they've handled things and how they are continuing to handle things as well. And so it's not a contradiction, it's a complex.
Feelings are complex.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm excited for what some of the hardworking people at Blizzard are clearly working on and coming out with. And I fully intend at this point to support and play several of the things coming out.
It helps that they're probably 2 years, 3 years away.
That doesn't mean that I have to be thrilled or condoning anything they're doing right now. So feelings can be conflicted. And overall, this weekend was an exciting time to just focus on gamers and be around gamers.
Yeah.
So it was your first BlizzCon.
Yeah.
What were kind of your thoughts? I mean, you're comparing that to FanFest and everything like that.
It was really interesting because there's a ton of different kind of games as opposed to FanFest, where it's like Final Fantasy 100% of the time. And so you have different games. You have, StarCraft 2, you've got Overwatch, you've got Diablo, you've got World of Warcraft, and those all serve varying audiences. I think for me, I was really impressed by all the protesters as well, because they were very peaceful. It was going on within. People had their shirts, they had their cosplay, and they also saw a lot of families here together. It was a really diverse group of people, and I honestly felt the event was run really smoothly.
Yeah.
Registration was fairly straightforward. Getting in and out was straightforward. I felt like I could come and go as I pleased. There's so much that was going on at any one point. Honestly, it was very overwhelming. There was many times that I was like, oh, I can watch this later on demand. Okay, I might opt for that and go take a nap, because I actually went through the Diablo 4 line 4 times and played it, played every class. I just dove into that game as well. So it's honestly, I have no complaints. We're really close to the convention center, so we would just walk the convention center, walk back for a late lunch or a nap, and then just kind of do it all over again. This is your second one. 2018 was pretty the mood was definitely had to be different. What are your thoughts?
So I was talking with some members of the community, and they were talking about how when so we're here with a group, and many members of that group have been to at or close to all, I think it's 13 BlizzCons now. So some of these people have been to every single one. At least some form of this community has been at every single one. And so it's interesting to hear them talk about, and they have shirts that they wear, and you'll see shirts that have the year on it and stuff. And so it's neat to be part of that. And they talk about how when BlizzCon first came out, there was a question of, can one developer even have a conference, like a convention that's entirely centered on just their games? Can they even have enough content?
Nintendo could.
And I joked last year, it's last year they didn't have any announcements and they still have one. So you don't even have to have content. So last year was largely centered. It was a pretty empty year as far as IP goes. There was very little to announce. It was a bye year for WoW. Hearthstone got another season as usual. Here's the Storm, which did get a new hero this time. Kind of felt like it got the axe. Nobody confirmed D4. It centered on a poorly handled Diablo Immortal announcement. And but it was still my first BlizzCon, and it's something I wanted to go to my whole life. So I still had a really positive experience, even though in the context of other BlizzCons, maybe it would have been disappointing if it was my 12th BlizzCon.
Yeah.
And this year was so much better. It showed me a lot of why maybe last year wasn't great, but I didn't have that context at the time, so I get to have that fond memory. But this year was the security was better. Like it was easy to get in and out. It was very smooth. Registration was better. It felt like there was more people, and yet I never felt like people were pushing or shoving. It was very polite. The staff seemed genuinely happy to be there.
Yeah.
The venue just felt upbeat, and the announcements were great. Whether or not they announced some of those games too soon, we'll know in the next few years. But as of today, very, very excited. I felt that I had a great BlizzCon, and I'm really glad I got to come.
Yeah, I've been actually going to hang out with you and all the jerks, which has been a treat, especially because we have a podcast coming out tomorrow with one of them. They're a former Blizzard employee, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that conversation, in-depth look behind the scenes at Blizzard from somebody who used to work there. So I think that's going to be really exciting. So I want to talk to you about Diablo, because that is something that for me as a fan of Blizzard games is something that I've played every single one of them. Diablo 3 I've poured way more time than others combined because of the fact that it is on console. And it kept becoming more and more accessible. The fact that I can play it with a controller, my default go-to. If you don't know that, hit that subscribe button and you'll clearly see how much of a fan of controllers I am. But I went through the line 4 times. I played all the classes. The Barbarian, feels like a Barbarian. The Druid, thank goodness they're bringing a Druid. I'm so excited.
That's good.
And the Sorceress. And so I played all 3, and I played the Druid twice because it's good. And then I also went and played Immortal as well, because there was a kiosk in which they didn't announce it on the stage. I think that was the right call.
Yeah.
It exists. You can go play it.
Salt in the wound.
I'm surprised that it wasn't one of those, and it's out today kind of announcements.
Yeah.
Like, that would have been something like, hey, while you're waiting for Diablo 4, you can go play Immortal. Anyway, so I got to go hands-on with you got to go hands-on with it twice?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I was in line for the 3rd time, and I ended up ducking out to go listen to a deep dive on WoW.
Okay, excellent. So I want to know what your thoughts are, because I totally fanboyed out on the look, and we'll easily share my opinions here just in a second, but I'll let you go.
So it's a lot darker. It's like a Diablo 2 type lighting, obviously with modern fidelity. So like when your lightning goes off as a druid, it lights the whole room, and it just feels so good.
It feels so good.
It's got a more shallow palette, more like an ESO, so it feels more grim even in the well-lit areas, as opposed to then we came back to the house and they've been playing D3 on the Switch, on the TV. It's just kind of a casual pickup game, and it's so bright.
Somebody will have to do a side-by-side comparison, and it is not, like, I never thought of Diablo 3 as being like light and colorful, even though like a lot of people said that going in. I was like,
it looks like an arcade game compared to
oh my
D4.
gosh. Yeah, exactly. D4 is dark. And it's just like, it
dark.
feels very, I read something and it was so true, is that it feels like a world without hope, and you as the player are bringing hope. Like, that is where you stand, is that you choose who lives and dies. And
the world boss is mean. It was wiping the floor with players. It
awesome.
would just turn and just sling its arm, and you just watch like 3 people die.
Yeah.
Just gone. And there was times I was standing behind it safely as a druid, just bashing on it, and then it would turn around and slam its arms, and if you don't, I couldn't get out of the way fast enough.
It was amazing.
So it killed me.
The thing I like about it, because it is this shared world, it is kind of almost in a way of representing something that Destiny, like a void that is lost in the Battle.net world, and everybody's playing this game together. And when we all came together, there was 10, 15 people fighting that big boss. How epic and powerful it was. I think as a player, that's where I was you can go into your dungeons and have your solo experience, or those are private experiences. But then the open world is shared. You might run into people, you might not. And essentially that kind of plays into and as that grows, it's going to be interesting.
Rare.
Right. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because the world really felt large. Obviously, they're bringing in mounts that they said we didn't get to go hands-on with the mount. But
there's a horse in town.
I felt like, honestly, those kind of fights, I was like, yes, this is what I want. And I hope that we get to see them add in some kind of larger form content as well, because when participating in that as a giant group, I was thinking, how awesome would it be if something else were to come down the line beyond the 4-man content itself. Right. But who knows? Like, they're still early in development. The fact is, I would say don't look towards this game until 2021, 2022. But it could be a lot, like, I don't have a release date in mind, but I was still impressed.
We got to play a 20-minute slice, but that 20-minute slice was a very small area.
Yeah.
With, like, one dungeon, one event, a small enough loot table that, like, on my sorcerer, I saw Stone of Jordan drop multiple times. Like, you had a very set number. Even some of my blues matched up. And then one world boss. And then you could... To handle the density, you're only playing with, like, the people on your row. And the row of computers actually got so long on some of the rows that you and another friend were at one end, and they said if I sat down at the other end, I would be able to play with you guys, and I wasn't.
Right.
So it was an incredibly LAN type experience. The art was really, really, like, almost like it felt like some of the art was just kind of like line drawings, and so I think there's probably a refresh that it's going to get as they kind of dive further into what they want the game to look like.
I feel like they hit the D2 aesthetics. I feel like for people who are, like, wanting more customization and flexibility, that's where they're leaning into, and that excites me as a longtime fan. I'm going to speak to Druid just for a little bit, because
we could not adjust the build on.
We couldn't adjust the build, but they showed some of the skills. In fact, one of the things we'll probably do over the next coming weeks is kind of a deep dive, everything we know, everything that's been released summary. And as that changes, all of this is obviously subject to change, but the visual art animations going from werewolf to druid form to bear form, it felt so beautiful. Like, it was so well
almost
done.
disconcertingly seamless.
Yeah, it was like, but it was such a beautiful animation. You have your dogs, your wolves as pets. So as me, I'm like, I love pets. Like, I've got my druid, you got this nature, and then the fact that all of the abilities, even especially on a sorceress drawing at fireballs, when you're in these depths and these dark places, and how that would light up, and then you would see things off screen, and it's like how terrifying that could and possibly feel. And I've actually found some places that were really challenging as a solo player, and so there was, like, you could really go and explore, you could take the world as you wanted to see it, and there was a lot of freedom that I felt like the game brought in. But I was just having a blast playing the 3 different classes. Barbarian, like I said, I was like, I've played barbarians before. This feels like a barbarian, great.
Yeah.
Sorcerers felt great. Druid was really, I think, the standout of the 3 classes that we got to go hands-on with.
The builds they had on all 3 were very, like, a sampling. And so you got to try a little bit of this ability, a little bit of this. It really showed me that, like, that we're really going to get to explore these a lot deeper when I can dive in and I can do a all vortex build or an all bear build or a all two-hander build. And, like, there's something about kind of mixing and matching that's so suboptimal that even if you're not trying to optimize in these games, you will probably lean harder into your personality with the way the traits build out and the talents. There's a lot of customization. If the classes end up built out like they showed us, there is a lot of customization.
And that leads it to kind of the idea, before we talk about Overwatch 2, is that Diablo 4 and how they're presenting it right now feels like what people wanted in player agency and character building and that kind of freedom of both expression in a class as well as how you approach the world. And so what was really fascinating about that is that it's not a Diablo 2 remastered. It is a Diablo 4, but we're looking back at the past and seeing what people really liked about these RPGs. I didn't feel any real homogenization between the sorceress and the druid and the barbarian. I felt like, holy crap, look at all the different options, and we couldn't really pick them. So ultimately, when this game gets closer and we get more hands-on, and I'm personally very excited with the direction that they've showed artistically. Just the animations, like the technology, I felt like I was running around the Highlands in Scotland. The depth and how mountains were forming and hills were there. It felt beautiful and in its despair.
It was as grim as Diablo 1. The loot system and player customization was as good as Diablo 2. The combat was as seamless as Diablo 3. And then you lay on top all the modern technologies, like no more transitioning between floors.
Yeah.
You know, you can just seamlessly walk to level 2. You know, world bosses, M+ style dungeons, all these. And so you literally take all the layers of previous Diablos, and then you take the things that are available now that they may have wanted to do in previous Diablos, but the technology wasn't there. And I think that it's really going to be its own Diablo. It really is going to be its own experience. The team that they have working on it is not the old guard. They look very young.
Yeah.
And I'm really impressed with the passion that seems to be poured into it, just based on how little we've gotten to know so far.
So did you get to go hands-on with Overwatch 2 at all?
I did. I played the PvE. That was so we both hoped that we thought that Overwatch 2 would launch, and we thought that it would launch with either a Battle Royale or PvE. It ended up being PvE. It's a chance for them to tell that story.
Right.
New heroes, lots of new stuff.
I really want to more drive this conversation because going hands-on with both felt great, but it still feels like it's a while away. It's not even soon for Blizzard's, terms, right? This is still probably 2 or 3 years away, just like Diablo.
Could be.
Diablo 4 probably is going to come out before Overwatch 2. It depends, but we'll see. I really like the PvE aspect. I've been saying Overwatch needed that. I've always really enjoyed Overwatch's PvP, and one of the things that I would love our game nights to check out to see if it would work is would Overwatch work for our game nights, because it has such a real awesome character depth. So going hands-on, I played it, it felt like Overwatch. It's not like, oh my gosh, they added a druid to Diablo 4 and it's amazing. No, it's like, this is Overwatch. But what I want to drive the conversation to is how they're transitioning from Overwatch to 2.
There's a lot of pessimism that it was going to be a loot box reset.
All of your stuff goes forward. Overwatch 1 gets the new characters, gets the new maps, gets the new modes, can play with they're not dividing up the community at all. So that's really interesting, because that's one of the problems, from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2.
Solid response to Destiny 2 coming out and saying, we can be really good people now that we're separate from you.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we can be good people too. It's really generous. It's really thoughtful.
It also keeps the Overwatch community together. In Overwatch 1, especially why they work on Overwatch Chapter 2. It's it's really kind of that, hey, we're having an upgraded engine, we're adding these things, we're not dividing it, so you don't have to feel, if you don't want the
feels
PvE.
Like an expansion.
In a way, but that's how I think these games as a service games need to be. You need to respect the player base and the investment, whether it's monetary or time, in going forward. This is where, when you look at, in contrast, Activision itself with Call of Duty has no carry forward, has no respect. Where then you look at Forza's like, hey, I see you've played our other games. Here's a bunch of cool free stuff.
Right.
Now, because they're a collection card game, you can't just say, oh, I see you already collected all the cards. You go after the 5 new ones or the 10 new ones. Right. So it's I see how some games can handle it differently, but Overwatch gives them the opportunity. Now, I would fully suspect that all the new cosmetics are going to be unlocked in Overwatch 2. I bet they might even have a different system, maybe a seasonal pass, or who knows what.
Just like Destiny 2, if you've bought the new expansion, you have the other players can play with you, but you do have some advantages to encourage that jump. I think overall it was very thoughtful. It was they made it very clear in some of the panels that it seems like they thought about some of these features trying to be an actual expansion, and it just became too big of a list, and they said we're gonna have to rework the engine. It's not a new engine, but we're going to have to greatly enhance it in some ways.
Yeah.
And that's going to make some things very hard to implement. So we need to go ahead and, rather than just bolt on here and here and here and here, let's go ahead and just sit down, do it right, and put a lot of features out in one big package and put a 2 after it.
Yeah.
And I think it makes a lot of sense. It was very well presented. The line stayed long for it all weekend on both modes.
It was fun.
A PvE line and a PvP line both stayed very long.
It's fun. I'm excited about it. And honestly, it makes me want to go play more Overwatch 1 just because, I can unlock that stuff and maybe that'd be good to carry forward. So we'll see.
Yeah, it does.
So I'm not a Hearthstone player, so...
Dragons, new mode,
awesome.
dealing with kind of the auto battle and things like that. The people that were here with their fans of Hearthstone have said it was immensely fun, to the point where I think some of them ended up spending a significant portion of the second day in the Hearthstone area just playing over and over and over and over. So it's exciting to see them continued support for that game. It being kind of a competitor with a Magic the Gathering style game, you end up with this very seasonal-esque content. So the announcements never have a ton of impact because you're getting new content all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, they are constantly supporting that game. And I think that the announcements were relatively short compared to the others, but I think a lot of that had to do with like the Blitzchung situation, because the Hearthstone area is this huge built-out tavern, and there was tons of people in there having a great time. They had artists come in and present in the morning, so it's a community that they clearly wanted to have a big role. They actually moved it from the secondary hall last year to the main hall this year. It was front and center. And it's cool to walk by a big tavern like that. It's cool to walk by where they have the fire and the big tables and the bar and everything like that. But let's go ahead and keep moving. World of Warcraft.
Shadowlands.
Shadow.
Bringers.
For those of you developing
Shadow
an MMO
King.
right now, be sure that you put Shadow in the name. It's neat. It actually looks like maybe shadows are what I'm interested in, because Shadowbringers made me interested in the lore of 14 in a way that it never caught me, and Shadowlands has me asking so many. Now that we're no longer talking about the living, I have so many questions about the living. And so having played the game off and on for 15 years, the majority of the years having played, I'm really interested in the lore.
Now, Shadowlands was originally a part of some either previous expansion or something that they were looking to add in as part of their roadmap from years ago, and now they're just getting
it's in some of the original art. So they actually said people thought we pulled this out of nowhere, and they flashed art on the screen that was from like some old school lore from like classics. So like it's always been in the roadmap, and now it's getting its own expansion. It's a chance for them to look at the world drastically differently, because we're no longer dealing in the living. We're moving into the land of where souls go when they die in World of Warcraft. And that's a great excuse to have almost like a second Cataclysm from a systems perspective, which means they can rework. So they're drastically changing the way we level. They're drastically changing the way new players come into the game, getting their own zone to kind of introduce them, give them like a greatest hits, ends in what could be construed as a dungeon, but it's meant to be geared at teaching players to play the game. It's something that I think MMOs would need. It feels like it ticks a lot of the boxes where we get concerned about what happens when a game gets to be, 10, 12, 15 years old.
They're doing a level squish. So how do you feel about that?
I think we'll have to go hands-on to really know for sure. One of the things they moved to the level sync system, which means that the world can scale the level. I think theirs is called level scaling. Final Fantasy is called sync. I don't know.
Well, they've added a party level
and
sync.
So they've and those have been band-aids to the situation. But now the problem is that you end up with content from an expansion existing in like a band of levels. That's where it's allowed to exist, and it can scale as long as it's inside that band. And what ends up happening is you start a story, right? So imagine for 14 players that you start Heavensward, and then halfway through Heavensward, you've out-leveled Heavensward. And so you just move on.
Yeah.
And so you end up with a lot of partial stories told. And they said Pandaria in particular, most people are only knocking out 1.5 zones before they out-level the band. And so what they're actually saying now is we're now going to you'll start a character and then you'll pick an expansion. Brand new players will all pick BFA because they believe a community should have a shared experience to relate back to. So it's important they all pick the same story. And it is the newest story, so it has the most of the design ideas they wish all games had now. So they want you to start with the most recent, but every second character after that, you'll pick an expansion. You don't have to, you can definitely break out of this system, but the intention is we'd like you to feel like, if you want to, that we'll guide you into finishing an expansion, and then that expansion will get you to level 50, and then from 50 to 60, you will go through Shadowlands. The reason for the squish is that in an RPG, levels should be rewarding. You should, and I agree with that mentality. The idea that 57 is more significant than 56 and every level should have a reward baked in. I agree with that. I agree with a lot of the reasons they're doing these things. The implementation, we'll just have to see. It's a drastic shift.
So that's going to be coming out next year. So it's like, that's not really shocker or surprising. No. We went hands-on with it. I ran around Bastion, I
finished the quest.
Yeah, like
I quest really fast.
Yeah. For me, like, the gameplay didn't feel ultimately too drastic. So like I'm just not like a main WoW player. So I wanted to touch it, which I did, and I was like, okay.
So what you noticed was the difference in the skills. You could feel it. There are skills from before, like Hunter's Mark no longer being locked behind talent trees, Paladins getting consecration back. Totems are now persistent again for Shaman. So there was all these little changes, and if you played a class, you noticed the ones that affected you. And you noticed them because they were on your bar. And you're like, oh, I haven't seen that ability in a long time. And so they're really trying to get back to the class identities of old and saying that a spec is just a way to double down on an aspect of the class. That specs should not be these starkly different experiences that they've slowly evolved into being. They have like their version of, I guess, the Final Fantasy Deep Dungeon. It is drastically different. Last night, one of the guys that works on the Dungeon and Raid team was hanging out with us here, and we were kind of talking about it. And you know, when you zoom in on just Final Fantasy versus WoW, they are very different. But when you zoom out at all, and you put any other game in, even another MMO like Destiny, for example, all of a sudden there are a lot of parallels. And so seeing what a WoW team does as their, I guess let's call it a response to Deep Dungeon.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see their version. It's a lot more about like picking your build as you go up. You have this anima you build up, and then you're going to be able to pick from like one of three things, and those will affect and you're building a character. It's almost like a Blue Mage-esque version of Deep Dungeon. So I really look forward to seeing it. It's endless. It is still procedural. It gets harder as you go, but you're getting more powerful, and you can go in there with anything between a 1 and 5 man. And there's a lot about Shadowlands that looks like it could be fun. I enjoyed BFA at the initial launch. It was the actual iteration of some of the loot systems that caused me to no longer want to engage as heavily. And the only way to know is hands-on.
Right. So ultimately, like when it comes down to Shadowlands, it's really like the name, all that's funny to me, especially because it's like Shadowbringers, Shadowkeeper, Shadowkeep, and Shadowlands. So it's like, yeah, I guess if we're going to be launching an MMO in the next year, keep the Year of Shadows rolling on, rolling on through. So we got to go hands-on with a lot of stuff. Like we've talked to a lot of people about what's going on here, Chris. What are your opinions? What are your takeaway? What does the workforce need to know after BlizzCon going into 2020?
So let's start with the bad,
okay,
and so we can end on a more positive note. So what I would say is they had a rough year, and one of the ways they countered that, and obviously they couldn't counter it with just weeks to go, but they clearly from the outset planned on showing us a lot of early things, a very Sony style way of doing things where we just show you everything we're working on. And that's very transparent. It's very nice. The downside of it is it gives us a chance to have hands-on with something where we have impressions and thoughts around it that are far from accurate because the game will change. And B, it starts generating a hype train that can result in a No Man's Sky or Anthem type situation where we have all this time where we either build up a hatred for the game or worse yet, in Anthem or No Man's Sky, we build up a love for the game and a love for all the things we know it will be. And then when it releases, not months later, not it could release years from now, it can be this totally morphed and different thing in our head by then. And it could be a real disappointment. So I think the bad thing is that they came out with a lot of stuff that did not have a launch date.
The I like that they announced Diablo 4 for Xbox One and PS4. I'm like, okay, well, it makes sense. A large player base.
More honest.
But let's talk Scarlet PS5. You know, being that those aren't official announcements, but
and not even new Scarlets and 5s. That Scarlet and 5 has some dust on it.
I think for the bad, it's like when you look at the internet and how it's responded. I liked that Jalen Brack got up and apologized, and he said he's sorry. But he also said actions speak louder than words. And one of the things I've told you guys is like it's actually kind of good that both Diablo 4 and Overwatch 2 do have years of development left, because that gives him and Blizzard the opportunity to show us what those actions are and what they mean overall for what it means to be Blizzard and all the complex relationships that go into a globalized industry. He talked about how games are a unifying factor and that they, from a perspective of good. I actually really enjoyed he did that before he showed us anything, as opposed to like, here's Diablo 4, Overwatch 2. We good? No, he got up. He stood up and said that. Now, the internet's reacted to his apology in different ways. Now, I'm going to take him at his word, and I'm going to root that they are able to go ahead and start repairing the damage. But it's not damage that's going to be repaired by just him standing up and saying that. It's not damage that's going to be repaired by Christmas. It's going to be years of them working to continue to further, and really show us what they can show us. And so that's I equate that as bad, because it was a cloud that kind of hung over BlizzCon.
It did.
But that's why, from a perspective of positive, all the protesters, everybody who was just like, it was very peaceful. It was like, it was very, like, it was known. And that shows me that as a gaming community, we're able to express and hit back. We were able to communicate that peacefully and let that be heard. I felt heard in my frustrations with Blizzard and the fact that shows that he stood up and said that first things first. Whatever they end up doing with it, we're going to have to wait and see ultimately. But that's essentially where it was like
smart enough to take the Q&A questions from Twitter and from machines that they had available all over the floor, to kind of have a chance to screen those to make sure that they were not just people wanting to see if, hey mom, look, I'm on TV and I'm going to talk about Hong Kong. Like it was very clever for them to say we got to focus on gaming here.
Or cowardly, but yeah.
I think it was a smart move. I think it was a strategic play.
Well, you want to get the information out. You don't want to. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, outside of the logically based conspiracy theory that they'll only pick the easy questions instead of the most common because we don't get to see the question selection process.
Right.
We get more questions answered in Q&As. Let's jump to 14, for example. We get more questions answered when they do the pre-screened ones to guarantee that they're all answerable, instead of getting somebody who tends to kind of feel like they need to elaborate on their question, and I think we also get a better set of questions. We don't always get the hard-hitting question, but across the board, across a set of 10, I think we get a better set of questions when there's a little bit of a screening process involved, as opposed to like at FanFest,
right,
where we get a lot more of the
exposition.
My character struggled in this one encounter in the DPS meters compared to this other character. What are you doing to fix that? And questions like, can you reveal the story from the end of next season? And it's like, no. Yeah. It was definitely a bummer. So moving on to the good.
Yes, Diablo 4.
Diablo 4 was really good. Seeing Overwatch 2, watching the StarCraft 2 championships. We watched the Overwatch
championships last night here at the house. That was amazing.
I had a lot of fun.
USA kicks China's butt.
I had a lot of fun. I'm really happy to see them starting to make that healing. The poor perception and reputation they have in parts of the community right now is earned.
Yes.
And the only way to fix that is to earn it the other way.
Yeah.
And it takes more to earn good than it does to damage it.
Yeah.
And so while I have mixed feelings about certain things within Blizzard, when I look at this weekend, everything was right that could have been right. Any negative feelings I have are either something I need to look in a mirror and decide if that's a part of myself that needs to get over it, or if that's a good thing, or they're things that take time. And this weekend was always set to be 2 or 3 days. Like, it can't get longer. And so time is just something that, like, there's nothing they could have done to make it better.
Right.
So at this point, they haven't proven to me that they're not on the right
think
path.
If he got up and he's like, we're going to reverse this or we're changing that, like, I hope to see maybe that kind of action after the show, but not on stage. Like, it's like, I think, because otherwise that would have just...
Way to get it out in front. Instead of going all weekend being like, and see how great it is, see how much better we are. I really appreciate coming out and saying, let's talk while you're still a little bit annoyed. Let's not distract you with all these pleasantries.
Right.
And then it feels like, oh, you just released D4 so you can apologize. It's like, no. I'm going to apologize first. I'm going to take your anger and your frustration right in the face, and then let's talk about D4.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great to see what happens from here on out, because if he's true to his words and actions speak louder than the words that he expresses, that's something we're going to be able to measure over the next year, 2 years, and so on. And if they don't do anything, then it's up to the gamers to decide. Just like we had with our podcast, like, money speaks. So spend your money with what you believe in, and that's going to help send a message. But also make sure you communicate in a very clear compassion. Sometimes it might be obvious to us one way, but it might not necessarily be able to be obvious to the developers. And so there is a work, and we got that podcast coming up tomorrow. So be sure to check that out. I'll link to it.
It's great to get to go hands on.
Oh, hands down!
Awesome.
Now, if they could bring controller support for PC and crossplay for Diablo 4, that would be, So anyway, guys, we'll be doing some deep dives on what we know. Probably when we actually get back to the house.
I took pages and pages of notes. We've got some VODs of the talks we missed because they had multiple stages going at the same time. So there were a couple things that, since I couldn't be at 2 places at once, I couldn't teleport instantly because there were so many people here. I missed like the first 10 minutes of one, so I have to go back and watch that. So, but I think we could put out whole videos on each individual game on what's changing, at least as far as the games we're interested in.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot coming down the pipe from Blizzard. A lot we know that we didn't, and it was a really good weekend. So I don't know that it totally fixes everything, but definitely a step in the right direction. I really appreciate the effort and the passion that must have come from people at Blizzard that really care to make this weekend possible.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's going to wrap it up for me for this video.
Yeah.
So, guys, let us know what you're thinking in the comments below. If you have any questions, be sure. Yeah,
anything you want us to hit in those deep dives?
Absolutely. Also, be sure to check out our Discord, Reddit, Twitch, Twitter, all that fun stuff. Links are all in the description below. But for Work to Game, my name's Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.
We'll see you next time.